everyone. Welcome back to another episode. We're so glad you're here with us today because we're talking about a topic that a lot of people ask us about: how to improve your English. Whether you're a beginner or someone looking to fine-tune your skills, we've got some great habits that can really help. Stick around, and by the end of this podcast, you'll have practical tips you can start using right away. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. Improving your English doesn't have to be overwhelming. It's all about incorporating simple habits into your daily routine. Let's start with one of the most important habits: reading. How do you feel reading impacts language learning?
Reading is one of the best ways to immerse yourself in the language. You get exposed to new vocabulary, grammar, and sentence structures without even realizing it. What's great is that you can start with things you enjoy, like articles, books, or even social media posts. I think it's important to make sure the material is at the right level for you. What do you think?
I agree completely. It's about finding the balance between something that's challenging but not too difficult. If what you're reading is too hard, you might get discouraged, but if it's too easy, you won't learn anything new. One tip I have is to read aloud. It helps with pronunciation, and you become more familiar with how the words sound.
Exactly. And don't worry about reading slowly at first. Speed will come with time. Plus, reading aloud gives you a chance to practice speaking, even when you're by yourself. Which leads to another key habit: listening. It's so important to listen to English as much as possible, whether it's podcasts, music, or even news broadcasts.
Yes, and the great thing about listening is that you can do it anywhere, while you're cooking, driving, or exercising. I'd say podcasts and audiobooks are fantastic for practicing listening skills. And here's the trick. Start with slower-paced content if you're a beginner, but gradually challenge yourself by listening to more natural, fast-paced conversations. It's really helpful.
That's true. Listening to native speakers helps train your ear to understand different accents and pronunciations. Another habit to pair with this is using subtitles when watching movies or TV shows. I suggest starting with English subtitles and then gradually turning them off as you get more comfortable with listening. Have you ever done that?
Yes, and the great thing about listening is that you can do it anywhere, while you're cooking, driving, or exercising. I'd say podcasts and audiobooks are fantastic for practicing listening skills. And here's the trick. Start with slower-paced content if you're a beginner, but gradually challenge yourself by listening to more natural, fast-paced conversations. It's really helpful.
Absolutely. And speaking of following along, another habit that often gets overlooked is practicing speaking. A lot of people are afraid of making mistakes, but it's so important to speak regularly. I always recommend finding a language partner or even talking to yourself if you don't have anyone to practice with.
Talking to yourself is a great way to practice. Narrating your day, thinking in English, or describing things around you can really help. And don't forget that apps like HelloTalk or Tandem are also good for finding language partners. Even chatting with someone for 10 minutes a day can make a big difference over time.
Yes, those apps are great for conversation practice. And if you don't have time for long conversations, even just repeating after native speakers while watching videos or listening to podcasts can be useful. The more you speak and listen, the more natural English will feel to you.
Definitely. I think it works really well, and even for intermediate learners, It can be helpful to switch back and forth between subtitles on and off, depending on the content. For instance, if you're watching a comedy or something with a lot of slang, subtitles can make a huge difference in helping you follow along.
I agree. Grammar is important, but it shouldn't hold you back. The more you speak, the more you'll naturally pick up on what sounds right. I think people put too much pressure on themselves to be perfect. The goal is communication, not perfection. But if you want to work on grammar, there are plenty of resources to help with that too, right?
Right. And that repetition builds confidence. Speaking also helps reinforce grammar points that you might struggle with when writing. I know some learners are really focused on getting their grammar right, but I always say, don't let it stop you from speaking. What's your take on that, Lily?
Exactly. The more you write, the more comfortable you'll become with forming sentences and using new words. And as you mentioned earlier, keeping a vocabulary journal where you write down new words you've learned can really boost your progress.
Exactly. Grammar apps and websites can provide a lot of support. I personally like using tools like Duolingo or even grammar checkers like Grammarly when writing. They give you real-time feedback, which is really helpful. But like you said, don't let grammar rules scare you away from speaking.
Yes. And speaking of active learning, another great habit is listening to English music and singing along. Music helps you remember phrases and idioms, and it's a fun way to practice pronunciation. Plus, you can choose songs based on your interests, which makes it more enjoyable.
Totally. Writing regularly, whether it's in a journal or even commenting on social media, gives you the chance to experiment with new vocabulary and grammar. It also helps reinforce what you've learned. And just like with speaking, don't worry too much about being perfect. Just get your ideas down.
And to wrap it all up, I think the best habit you can develop is consistency. Try to immerse yourself in English every day, even if it's just for 10 or 15 minutes. It doesn't matter if you're reading, listening, writing, or speaking. The key is to practice regularly.
Vocabulary journals are an amazing tool. You don't just write the words. You can also add example sentences, synonyms, or even pictures to help remember them. It's a more active way to learn than just looking at a list of words.
Exactly. Well, that's it for today's episode on the best habits to improve your English. We hope you found these tips helpful and are excited to try some of them in your own learning routine. Remember, progress takes time, so be patient with yourself and stay consistent.
Yes, and the great thing about listening is that you can do it anywhere, while you're cooking, driving, or exercising. I'd say podcasts and audiobooks are fantastic for practicing listening skills. And here's the trick. Start with slower-paced content if you're a beginner, but gradually challenge yourself by listening to more natural, fast-paced conversations. It's really helpful.
Yes, and we'd love to hear from you. What are your favorite habits for improving your English? Have you tried any of the ones we discussed today? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to tell us what topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Exactly. Music has a way of sticking in your head. I know some people who learned entire phrases just from songs. It's a fun and low-pressure way to immerse yourself in the language. Yes, and we'd love to hear from you. What are your favorite habits for improving your English? Have you tried any of the ones we discussed today? Let us know in the comments, And don't forget to tell us what topics you'd like to hear about in future episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.